Good morning and happy Thursday. This is just your Thursday check-in video to kind of wrap up the week for you and give you some pointers about things to look for and do for the rest of this module. I hope you guys are enjoying Frankenstein. I had some really good conversations with your classmates yesterday. And just something that I want to mention about it as you are going to be finishing up the novel for Saturday is to remember the structure of the novel and the way that we switch points of view. So we start with what's called the frame tale. We start with Walton and his perspective. And then once Victor starts telling his story to Walton, we kind of move into the next perspective, which is from Victor. So even though Walton is translating all of this for his sister in letters, and that's what we're reading, it still very much feels like Victor's perspective once Victor starts telling the story. And we know this because Walton drops out. We don't hear his voice anymore. There's not really much interaction between Walton and Victor, so it just sounds like a first-person story from Victor. And then we get to the innermost layer, which is when the creature starts telling his story to Victor. So same kind of thing. We know that Victor is relaying the monster's story to Walton, and then Walton is relaying that to his sister. So there is some translation happening there, but by and large, what Shelley, I think, wants us to feel is that switch in perspective. So once the monster starts telling his story, we have kind of the creature side of the story, right? So you might feel kind of how is your identification and your sympathy changing when we get to hear from the creature versus only Victor's perspective. So that's kind of the innermost layer as we have the creature story. And then it just reverses as the novel ends. So once the creature stops telling his story to Victor, then we're back to Victor's perspective, right? And then at the very end, what you'll do is you'll come back to Walton and his perspective. And so that's why it's a frame tale, because it begins with Walton and then it ends with Walton. And so I want you to kind of think about the way that these perspectives might shape whose side you're on and how that complicates this notion of good guy and bad guy. The other thing to kind of watch for is all of the ways that people respond to the monster, the creature. How does Victor respond to the creature from that initial response when the creature is animated and comes alive, then all the way through the novel? How does Victor respond to the creature on top of the mountain, Montanvert? That's a really important scene, right? When the creature says, listen to me, listen to my story, and he gives the reasons why he wants Victor to at least give him a chance and hear his story. So how does Victor respond there? How does Victor respond to the creature's request to make a female companion for him? Victor kind of has two responses to that, right? There's an initial response and then a later one, and they're quite different. And then also when the creature is telling his story, what are all the different responses to the creature? You have the villagers that he first comes across when he's wandering aimlessly around. You have the DeLacy family, right, which is a really important interaction. It helps humanize the monster, and so we learn a lot from that encounter. So really pay attention to how the creature responds to the DeLacys and how they respond to him. And then even small encounters, responses to the monster, like the woodsman, after the DeLacys have kind of discovered the monster, right? How does the woodsman respond to the creature? And then at the very end, how does Walton respond to the creature? So, spoiler alert, you'll get to see an interaction between Walton and the creature. So one thing that you might think about at that end too is, does Walton seem to learn anything or to change? Because he's heard Victor's story now. We talked about how much Victor and Walton are alike at the beginning of the novel. Is there something that's different about them at the end? The other thing that I wanted to just say is you'll also have a chance, if you would like, to do a reading response on Shelley and Wordsworth's poem. This is Percy Shelley, right? So Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. So this is a poem by her husband. They're both a sonnet, which is really fun, and the overview notes talks a little bit about the sonnet form. I really recommend that you listen to the intro to the Romantic Period video, because both of these poems are talking about kind of issues that they have with some things that are going on, and they're really complaining about laws that were made, the way the government is functioning. Kind of makes an interesting analogy to sort of how people feel right now in our country. So you can kind of imagine Wordsworth and and Shelley is sort of upset about some events that have happened and ways that the government and citizens have responded to those events. And so they're kind of critiquing that in a way that someone might write a poem today. So you could also have fun if you wanted to. The response question just kind of asks you to compare, what is it that they're critiquing? What are they upset about, England at this time? And then kind of thinking about the solutions that they propose. You should notice that Shelley's poem is much harsher in its critique. It's much more kind of in your face, and its solution, if we think about that echo of revolution in the last couple lines, the couplet, is much calls for much more action. And Shelley actually couldn't publish that poem when he first wrote it because it was a little bit too revolutionary. Wordsworth is much more sedate, right? He's still critical, but his solution has a lot more to do. One way you could think about it, if you look at the poem, is kind of personal reform. You might think about why he's calling on Milton and what does that mean to think about a writer as the ideal that people are striving for. So there's kind of some overall differences between those two poems, and you can look at the specific lines to see how that is working out. So I hope you have fun finishing up Frankenstein. You've got a quiz today and then your reading response on Saturday. If you have any questions, email me and let me know.